In 1881, a letter arrived in Bitter Creek, Wyoming, that would change 2 lives forever. Jericho Vance was a man who had buried his heart along with his family. A gunman so feared that even the shadows moved out of his way. But when a desperate woman named Abigail Moore stepped off the train with a wedding dress in her trunk and a secret in her belly, she didn't run from the monster. Instead, she walked right up to his porch, looked him in the eye, and begged him to marry her. What happened next wasn't a romance. It was a war, and the twist that bound them together. It's something you'll never see coming. This is the true untold story of the bride who tamed the devil. The train screeched to a halt like a dying beast, iron wheels grinding against the frost-bitten rails of the Union Pacific Line. Steam hissed into the gray Wyoming sky, obscuring the sign that hung crookedly from the station roof, Bitter Creek. Abigail Moore pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the passenger car. Her breath fogged the pain momentarily, hiding the grim reality waiting outside. She wasn't just tired, she was hollowed out. 3 days of travel from St. Louis, with nothing but a carpet bag, a trunk containing her mother's lace wedding gown, and $40 pinned to the inside of her corset. She touched her stomach instinctively. It was flat for now, but the clock was ticking louder than the station master's pocket watch. "Last stop, miss," the conductor said, eyeing her with a mixture of pity and confusion. He was an older man named Elias Thorne, who had seen plenty of hopefuls come west and fewer return. "You sure you got someone meeting you? Bitter Creek ain't exactly a place for a lady alone, especially not with the blizzard season coming in early." Abigail straightened her spine, smoothing the wrinkles in her traveling grey wool skirt. "My fiancé is meeting me, Mr. Thorne. Thank you." It was a lie. A necessary, desperate lie. She stepped onto the platform, the wind immediately biting through her coat. The town of Bitter Creek was hardly a town at all. It was a scar on the landscape. A row of clapboard buildings clinging to the mud, a saloon that smelled of stale beer and violence, even from 50 yards away, and a livery stable where horses stood with their heads low. She scanned the handful of men loitering by the depot. None of them looked like a savior. They were rough men, faces leathered by sun and wind, eyes hard as flint. "Looking for someone, darlin'?" a voice rasped. A man with a tobacco-stained beard and a gun belt slung low on his hips stepped forward. He smelled of unwashed skin and whiskey. Abigail gripped her bag tighter. "I am looking for Mr. Jericho Vance." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The chatter by the livery stopped. The man playing a harmonica on a crate froze. Even the wind seemed to drop a decibel. The bearded man laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Vance, you hear that, boys? The little lady is looking for the hangman." "He don't come to town, miss," another man called out, leaning against a post. "And he definitely don't receive callers, unless you're selling ammunition or coffins." "He is expecting me," Abigail lied again, though her voice trembled. She pulled a crumpled letter from her pocket, the advertisement she had answered 3 months ago. Wanted wife. Must be Hardy. No questions asked. Apply to JV Bitter Creek. The bearded man spat on the ground, dangerously close to her boot. "Jericho Vance didn't write no letter, lady. Vance can't hardly write his own name without breaking the pencil. Whatever joker sent you that was pulling your leg." Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. It couldn't be a joke. It couldn't be. She had sold everything. She had run from a scandal in St. Louis that threatened to destroy not just her reputation, but her life. "Where does he live?" she asked, her voice stealing. "Up on the ridge," the station master, Elias whispered, stepping off the train behind her to unload her trunk. 5 miles north past the Devil's Thumb Rock Formation. But listen to me, child. Don't go. Jericho Vance. They say he killed 3 men in a fair fight just for looking at his horse wrong. He lives alone for a reason." "I have no choice," Abigail whispered back. She spent her last $10 hiring a terrified boy with a mule cart to take her up the mountain. As the cart rattled away from the relative safety of the town, climbing the steep, pine-choked trail, Abigail realized she wasn't just walking into a marriage. She was walking into a fortress of solitude, built by a man the entire territory believed was the devil himself. The cabin was not the shack she had expected. It was a sprawling structure of dark, hand-hewn timber, built like a bunker against the side of the mountain. A massive stone chimney pumped black smoke into the air. There were no flowers, no curtains, no signs of softness. Just a chopping block with an axe buried deep in the wood, and a perimeter of silence that felt heavy. The boy dropped her trunk at the edge of the clearing and scrambled back into his cart. "I ain't going closer, miss. He shoots trespassers." "Wait!" Abigail cried, but the mule was already scrambling down the path. She was alone. She dragged the heavy trunk through the snow-dusted mud, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She reached the heavy oak door and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. "Mr. Vance! Mr. Vance! I'm here!" The door didn't open. Instead, she heard the distinct, terrifying click of a lever-action rifle being cocked behind her. Abigail froze. Slowly, she turned around. Standing by the corner of the house, emerging from the shadows of the pines, was a mountain of a man. He was huge, easily 6'4", wearing a duster coat that had seen more rain and blood than any garment should. His hat was pulled low, but beneath the brim eyes, the color of cold steel bored into her. He held a Winchester rifle, leveled at her chest, steady as a rock. "Give me one reason I shouldn't drop you where you stand," he rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "I'm Abigail," she stammered, holding up the crumpled letter. "I'm your wife. I'm here to be your wife." Jericho Vance didn't lower the gun. He stepped closer, the snow crunching under his heavy boots. He snatched the letter from her shaking hand, glanced at it, and then crumpled it in his fist. "I didn't write this," he said flatly. Abigail's heart stopped. "But it says J.V. Bitter Creek. It says, I know what it says. My brother wrote it." Jericho spat the words out like poison. "Caleb. He thinks he's funny. Thinks I need civilizing. He put that ad in the Saint. Louis papers to torment me." He threw the crumpled paper into the mud. "Go home, lady." "I can't," Abigail whispered. The cold was seeping into her bones, but the fear of returning to St. Louis was colder. "Not my problem. Start walking." He turned his back on her and walked towards the door. "Please!" Abigail screamed, dropping to her knees in the mud. The dignity she had held on to for so long shattered. "Please, Mr. Vance, I have nowhere to go. I spent every penny I had to get here. I have no family. I am in trouble." Jericho stopped with his hand on the latch. He looked back over his shoulder. For a second, Abigail saw something other than rage in his eyes. Exhaustion. Maybe trouble, he asked. Law trouble. Family trouble. She lied, though it was half true. "My stepfather. He will kill me if I return. I just need a place to stay. I can cook. I can clean. I can tend a garden. I won't get in your way. Just, please marry me. On paper. I need the name. I need the protection." Jericho laughed a dark, humorless sound. "Protection. You want protection from me, lady? I'm the thing people need protection from. You stay here, you end up dead. Or wishing you were." "I'll take that risk," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. She looked up at him, mud staining her skirt, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Everyone in town says you're a monster, but a monster would have shot me by now. You haven't?" Jericho stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He looked at her delicate hands, her terrified eyes, and the sheer desperation radiating off her. He hated Caleb for this. He hated the town for sending her up here. But mostly he hated that he couldn't just leave her to freeze. "You got a name," he grunted. "Abigail. Abigail Moore." "Well, Abigail Moore." Jericho pushed the door open, revealing a dark, warm interior lit by the fire. "You can sleep in the barn tonight. Tomorrow I'm taking you back to the train." "But I have no money for a ticket." "Then I'll buy you one," he snapped. "I work alone. I live alone. And I sure as hell don't need a wife." He stepped inside and slammed the door, leaving her on the porch. Abigail didn't cry. She stood up, wiped the mud from her knees, and dragged her trunk toward the barn. He hadn't said yes. But he hadn't killed her. That night, huddled under a scratchy horse blanket in the hayloft, listening to the wind howl through the eaves, Abigail made a vow. She wouldn't be on that train tomorrow. She had to make Jericho Vance need her. Because in roughly 7 months, she was going to give birth to a baby that belonged to the most powerful and dangerous senator in Missouri. And if Senator Colton Graves found her, Jericho Vance's gun was the only thing on earth that could stop him. Morning broke over the ridge, not with sunlight, but with a white, suffocating silence. The blizzard that Elias Thorne had warned about at the station hadn't just arrived. It had laid siege to the mountain. Jericho kicked the barn door open, a bucket of steaming water in his hand, intending to water the horses and send the woman packing. He stopped dead. The world outside was erased. Snow was drifted 4 feet high against the barn wall, and the wind was screaming like a banshee, tearing through the pines with enough force to snap branches. Inside the barn, Abigail was already awake. She was shivering violently, huddled in the corner of a stall where the draft was weakest. She had pulled the expensive lace wedding dress out of her trunk and wrapped it around her shoulders like a shawl, a tragic, absurd sight of white satin against the dirty straw. Jericho looked at her, then at the wall of white snow outside. He swore loudly, a string of curses that made Abigail flinch. "Get up!" he barked, setting the bucket down. Abigail scrambled to her feet, clutching the dress. "I can leave. I just need—" "You ain't going nowhere," Jericho growled. "Look outside, the pass is closed. A mule couldn't get down that trail today, let alone a woman in city boots. If you step out there, you'll be a frozen corpse in an hour, and I don't have the ground to dig a grave till spring." He grabbed her arm. His grip was hard but not cruel, and hauled her toward the house. "Inside now!" The cabin was warm. The smell of wood smoke and coffee hit Abigail like a physical blow, making her knees weak. Jericho shoved her toward the fire. "Thaw out! I ain't having you die of hypothermia on my floor." For the next hour they existed in a tense, hostile silence. Jericho paced the small room like a cooled tiger. He checked his rifles, oiled his boots, and glared out the window at the relentless snow. Abigail sat on a wooden stool, her teeth finally ceasing to chatter. She looked around the room. It was filthy. Not with garbage, but with neglect. Dust coated the mantelpiece. The cast-iron skillet on the stove was caked with old grease. Unwashed shirts were propped on a chair. It was the home of a man who had stopped caring if he lived or died. "Mr. Vance," Abigail said softly. He didn't turn. "Don't talk." "If I am to stay here until the storm passes," she persisted, her voice gaining a fraction of strength, "we should have an arrangement." Jericho turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "An arrangement? You're trespassing in my house, eating my food, and you want to make a deal." "I can earn my keep," she said. She stood up, shedding the wedding dress and folding it neatly. Beneath it, she wore a simple white blouse and the grey skirt now stained and wrinkled. "You live like a bear, Mr. Vance. Your home is a mess. Your clothes need mending. I assume your cooking is barely edible. I will fix this place. I will cook clean and mend. In exchange, you let me stay until the snow clears. And," she hesitated, "and you don't ask about my past." Jericho scoffed. "I don't care about your past, lady, and I like my dirt." No one likes dirt, she countered. They just get used to it when they lose hope. The comment struck a nerve. Jericho stiffened. He walked over to her, towering over her small frame. He smelled of gun oil and pine. You think you know me? I know you haven't shot me yet, she said, holding his gaze. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. Jericho stared at her. He saw the terror behind her eyes, but also a steel rod of determination. He remembered the look of the men he had faced in duels, men who knew they might die, but stood their ground anyway. He respected that. Fine, he grunted. You cook, you clean, you keep your mouth shut. Storm breaks, you're gone. Deal. Deal, she whispered. And one more thing. Jericho pointed a calloused finger at her. You sleep in the loft. I sleep down here. If I hear you creeping around at night, I shoot first and ask questions later. I got enemies, Abigail. Real ones, not stepfathers. Abigail nodded. Understood. The first twist came that evening. Abigail found a sack of flour and some dried beef. She managed to scrounge up some wizened potatoes from the root cellar. Jericho watched her from the corner whittling a piece of wood, expecting her to fail. He expected a city girl who would burn the water. Instead, she moved with a surprising efficiency. She scrubbed the skillet with fate and boiling water until it shone. She kneaded dough with practiced hands. Within an hour, the cabin smelled of biscuits and savory stew, a smell Jericho hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not since Sarah. When she placed the plate in front of him, he hesitated. He took a bite. The beef was tender, the gravy thick and peppery, the biscuits fluffy. It was the best meal he had eaten in half a decade. He ate in silence, scraping the plate clean. When he finished, he looked at her. She was watching him anxiously, her own plate untouched. It's edible, he lied. It was delicious. Thank you, she said. Suddenly, Jericho stood up and walked to a heavy wooden chest at the foot of his bed. He unlocked it and pulled out a heavy buffalo robe. He tossed it to her. Use that in the loft. It gets cold up there. It was a small kindness, sharp and jagged, but a kindness nonetheless. Abigail clutched the fur. Mr. Vance, why do they call you the hangman? Jericho froze. The firelight cast long shadows across his scarred face. Because Abigail, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. Before I came up this mountain, I was a U.S. Marshal, and I didn't believe in jails. I believed in ropes. He blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. Go to sleep. The storm raged for 4 days. 4 days of wind that rattled the timbers of the cabin like a giant trying to shake them out. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. It was a domestic war of attrition. Abigail attacked the grime of the cabin with a ferocity that baffled Jericho. She scrubbed the floors on her hands and knees until the wood grain emerged from beneath years of mud. She organized his pantry. She even took his torn shirts, and by the light of the fire, darned the holes with tiny, precise stitches. Jericho tried to ignore her. He spent his time cleaning his weapons, an arsenal that included 2 Colt Peacemakers, a Winchester 1873, and a heavy Sharps buffalo rifle. He sharpened his Bowie knife until it could shave the hair off his arm. He wanted to intimidate her, to remind her that he was a killer. But Abigail Moore was proving to be frustratingly resilient. She didn't flinch when he slammed his gun belt on the table. She didn't scream when he gutted a rabbit in the sink. She just handed him a cloth to wipe his hands and asked if he wanted coffee. However, secrets have a way of rotting in close quarters. On the 3rd morning, Jericho woke to the sound of retching. He sat up instantly, hand on his revolver. The sound was coming from outside behind the cabin. He moved to the window. The snow had stopped falling, but the drifts were massive. Abigail was kneeling in the snow by the woodpile, heaving violently. Jericho watched, frowning. He had seen her push away her dinner the night before. He had noticed how pale she was in the mornings, how she sometimes pressed a hand to her stomach when she thought he wasn't looking. He put on his boots and coat and walked out. The air was crisp and freezing. Abigail wiped her mouth with snow trembling. She jumped when she saw him. "I'm fine," she gasped, her face grey. "Just something in the stew last night." Jericho leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "I ate the stew. I ain't sick." "I have a delicate stomach," she lied, standing up unsteadily. Jericho's eyes travelled down to her waist. She was wearing her corset loose. He had noticed her silhouette was less severe than when she arrived. He wasn't a fool. He had been a married man once. He knew the signs. "You ain't sick, Abigail," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You're pregnant." Abigail froze. The colour drained from her face completely, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the look in his eyes stopped her. There was no point. "Is that why you're here?" Jericho stepped closer, his anger rising. "You looking for a father for a bastard? You think I'm some chump you can pin a kid on?" "No," Abigail cried, backing away until she hit the woodpile. "No, Jericho. It's not like that. I never intended to deceive you about the parentage. I just needed safety." "Who is he?" Jericho demanded. "The stepfather you ran from." "No," she sobbed. "Not him. Someone worse." "Who?" "It doesn't matter," she screamed. "He doesn't want the baby. He wants it gone. And he wants me gone for carrying it. If I go back, he will kill us both. Please. I didn't come here to trap you. I came here because a mail-order bride is the best disguise in the world. No one looks for a senator's mistress in a shack in Wyoming." The words hung in the frozen air. Senator's mistress. Jericho stared at her. The disgust on his face was palpable. He hated politics. He hated lies. And he hated that this woman, who he was starting to begrudgingly respect, was carrying the baggage of some rich, corrupt politician. "Get inside," he spat, "before you freeze the kid." He turned and walked away, heading toward the barn. He needed to hit something. He chopped wood for 2 hours, swinging the axe with a violence that splintered the logs into matchsticks. When he came back inside, Abigail was sitting by the fire, sewing. She looked terrified. "When the snow melts," Jericho said, not looking at her. "You're going to tell me everything. The name, the threat, everything. If I'm harboring a fugitive, I need to know how big the target on my back is." "His name is Colton Graves," Abigail whispered. Jericho stopped polishing his rifle. He looked up, his face grim. "Graves, the one running for governor of Missouri?" "Yes." Jericho let out a low whistle. "Lady, you didn't bring me trouble. You brought me a war." The tension in the cabin shifted after that. It wasn't just two strangers anymore. It was two conspirators. Jericho didn't kick her out. He couldn't. He knew Colton Graves by reputation, a man who used marshals like private hitmen. If Abigail went down the mountain, she wouldn't last a week. But the real twist of Part 4 happened 2 nights later. They were eating dinner venison this time when the horses in the barn started screaming. Jericho was on his feet in a split-second, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, blowing out the lamp. "What is it?" Abigail hissed, grabbing a knife from the table. "Wolves," Jericho said. "Or worse." He slipped out the door. Abigail waited in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard shouting, the crack of the Winchester, and the snarling of beasts. Then silence. 5 minutes passed. 10. She couldn't wait anymore. She threw the heavy bolt and ran out into the snow, the kitchen knife clutched in her hand. Jericho. She found him by the corral. 3 dead timber wolves lay in the snow, black blood steaming in the cold. But Jericho was on his knees, clutching his left leg. A fourth wolf, wounded but alive, was circling him, preparing to lunge. Jericho's rifle was 5 feet away, knocked from his hand. The wolf sprang. Abigail didn't think. She didn't scream. She ran. She threw herself at the beast, driving the kitchen knife down with both hands. She struck the wolf in the neck, her momentum knocking it sideways. The animal thrashed, snapping its jaws inches from her face, its claws tearing at her skirt. "Move!" Jericho roared. He lunged forward, ignoring his mauled leg, and grabbed the wolf by the scruff of its neck and its hind leg. With a roar of primal effort, he ripped the beast off Abigail and slammed it into the fence post. He drew his revolver and put a bullet in its head. Silence returned. To the mountain. Jericho fell back against the fence, breathing hard. Blood was soaking his pant leg. Abigail scrambled over to him, her hands covered in wolf blood. "You crazy fool," Jericho wheezed, looking at her with wide eyes. "You jumped a wolf with a paring knife. You were down," Abigail said, her voice shaking uncontrollably now that the danger was over. She ripped a strip from her petticoat and immediately began binding his leg, tightening it hard. Jericho watched her. She wasn't fainting. She wasn't crying. She was saving his life. He reached out and grabbed her hand, stopping her frenzied movements. His hand was large, rough, and warm. "Abigail," he said. It was the first time he had said her name without a sneer. "We have to get you inside," she said, her eyes locked on his wound. "You saved me," he said, sounding baffled. "We made a bargain," she whispered, looking up at him. "You protect me. I earn my keep." Jericho looked at the dead wolves, then at the small, fierce woman kneeling in the blood-stained snow. He realized then that the senator wasn't the only danger. The real danger was that for the first time in 5 years, Jericho Vance didn't want to be alone. "Help me up, Mrs. Vance," he grunted. It was a joke, a dark, ironic joke, but as she tucked his arm over her shoulder and he leaned his weight on her, neither of them laughed. The snow had trapped them together, but the blood had bound them. And down in Bitter Creek, the telegraph lines were already humming with the news that a woman matching Abigail's description had been seen getting off the train. The war was coming. The thaw came 2 weeks later, not with a gentle melt, but with a slushy grey surrender. The drifts receded, revealing the muddy scars of the land. But inside the cabin, the atmosphere had shifted from a cold war to a tentative alliance. Jericho's leg was healing thanks to Abigail's relentless ministrations. She changed his bandages twice a day, brewing poultices from willow bark and dried sage she found in his haphazard collection of supplies. In return, Jericho taught her to shoot. It was a Tuesday morning when he hobbled out to the porch, leaning on a crutch he'd fashioned from a pine bough. He held the Colt Peacemaker out to her butt first. "Take it," he said. Abigail wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and took the heavy weapon. It felt cold and alien in her palm. "If Graves sends men," Jericho said, his voice void of emotion, "I can't be everywhere at once. You need to know how to put a man down." "I don't know if I can," Abigail whispered, staring at the cylinder. "You jumped a wolf with a kitchen knife," Jericho reminded her. "You can do this. Aim for the center of mass. Don't hesitate. Hesitation is what kills you, not the bullet." For the next week, the ridge echoed with the crack of gunfire. Abigail bruised her shoulder and deafened her ears. But she learned. She learned to load, to cock, to fire. She learned that Jericho Vance, the monster, was a patient teacher. He didn't yell. He merely corrected her grip, his large hands guiding hers with a surprising gentleness. But peace is a fragile thing in the West. It shattered on a sunny afternoon when a rider appeared at the edge of the clearing. Abigail was hanging laundry Jericho's shirts and her own petticoats on a line strung between 2 trees. She saw the horseman and froze her hand, instinctively going to the heavy pocket of her skirt where the Colt now rested. It wasn't a stranger. It was Elias Thorne, the station master from Bitter Creek. He rode up slowly, his hands visible on the reins, signaling he was unarmed. Jericho stepped out onto the porch, his rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. "Elias!" Jericho nodded his eyes, scanning the tree line behind the old man. "You're a long way from the tracks." "Jericho." Elias tipped his hat. He looked nervous, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. He glanced at Abigail, then back to the gunman. "I came to bring a warning. Didn't want to trust it to a boy." "What warning?" "3 men got off the noon train yesterday," Elias said, lowering his voice. "Pinkertons, flashy suits, city guns. They're asking about a woman. Specifically, a woman with a trunk full of lace." Abigail's breath hitched. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding. "They're offering a reward," Elias continued. $500 for information. That's a lot of money in a town like this, Jericho. Tongues are gonna wag. I told him I hadn't seen nothing but the livery boy. He's got a loose mouth." Jericho's jaw tightened. "Pinkertons. Hired by who?" "Didn't say, but they're mean-looking, and they're heading up this way at first light tomorrow." "Thanks, Elias," Jericho said. "You'd best get back before they notice you're gone." Elias turned his horse, then paused. "Jericho, $500 is a lot. You watch your back. Not everyone in town is as scared of you as they used to be." As Elias rode away, the silence of the mountain felt heavier, charged with static. "They found me," Abigail whispered. She looked at Jericho, terror flooding her eyes. "I have to leave. I can't let you get involved in a shootout with Pinkertons. They're lawful agents." "They're paid thugs," Jericho corrected, spitting on the ground. "And you ain't going anywhere. You think you can outrun Pinkertons on foot in the mud?" "I can't stay here. They'll kill you." Jericho turned to her. For the first time, he reached out and touched her face. His thumb grazed her cheekbone, wiping away a smudge of dirt. "Abigail," he said, his voice rough. "I made a deal. I said I'd protect you. Jericho Vance doesn't break his word." "Why?" she cried, tears spilling over. "Why risk your life for a lie?" "We aren't really married. I'm nothing to you. You're the only person in 5 years who didn't look at me like a dog that needed to be put down," Jericho said. "And you make a damn good biscuit." He turned away abruptly, hiding the emotion in his eyes. "Pack your things, but not to leave. We're fortifying." That night was a flurry of activity. They boarded up the windows. They filled barrels with water. Jericho laid out ammunition like he was preparing for a siege. But the twist came from within. Around midnight, Abigail woke up to a sound in the main room. She crept to the edge of the loft. Jericho was sitting by the fire, but he wasn't alone. A man was standing in the shadows of the corner. A man Abigail recognized instantly. It wasn't a Pinkerton. It was the bearded man from the train station, the one who had mocked her. "I told him where she was, Vance," the man hissed. "But I came to give you a chance. Give her to me. I'll take her down to them. You don't have to die for some city whore." Abigail's blood ran cold. She reached for the gun under her pillow. Jericho didn't move. He sat in his chair, cleaning his nails with his knife. "You sold her out, Deke, for $500. "Hell yes, and I'll split it with you. Just walk away." Jericho stood up slowly. "You broke into my house, Deke. I'm doing you a favor." "She's my wife," Jericho said. The lie sounded surprisingly like the truth. "She's a bounty," Deke snarled, reaching for his gun. He was fast, but Jericho was a legend for a reason. Before Deke's gun cleared, Jericho's knife flew across the room. It thudded into Deke's shoulder, pinning him to the wooden wall. Deke screamed, dropping his gun. Abigail scrambled down the ladder, gun raised. "Jericho." "I got him," Jericho said calmly. He walked over to the whimpering man and pulled the knife out. Deke slid to the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Get out," Jericho said, his voice like ice. "Tell the Pinkertons I'm waiting. Tell them to bring extra coffins." Deke scrambled out the door, leaving a trail of blood. Abigail stared at Jericho. He was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. "They're coming now," she said. "He'll lead them right here." "Good," Jericho said, slamming the bolt home on the door. "I'm tired of waiting." He turned to her. "Abigail, if this goes south, if I go down, there's a trap door under the rug. It leads to a root cellar that vents out the back into the ravine. You take it and you run." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "You have to," he said, looking at her stomach, "for the kid." He grabbed her shoulders. "Promise me." She looked into his eyes that were no longer cold, but burning with a fierce protectiveness. "I promise." Dawn broke with the sound of glass shattering. A bullet tore through the upper corner of the window, embedding itself in the far wall. Abigail dropped to the floor, covering her head. Jericho was already at the peephole, his Winchester barking a reply. "3 of them!" he shouted over the noise. "They're using the tree line for cover." The siege had begun. For an hour the cabin was a storm of noise and splinters. The Pinkertons were professionals. They moved in a pincer formation, keeping Jericho pinned down with suppressing fire while one tried to flank. Abigail wasn't idle. She crawled along the floor, reloading Jericho's spare magazines. Her hands shook, but she didn't stop. She was a machine fueled by adrenaline and the terrified kick of the baby in her womb. "They're getting closer," Jericho yelled, firing 2 rapid shots. "They're trying to burn us out." He was right. One of the agents had thrown a torch onto the porch. The dry wood caught instantly. Smoke began to curl under the door. "We can't stay here," Abigail coughed, her eyes watering. "The trap door!" Jericho roared. "Go now. Not without you. I have to cover you. If we both run, they'll cut us down in the open." Suddenly the front door shuddered. A battering ram. They were coming in. Jericho grabbed Abigail and dragged her to the rug. He threw it back, revealing the hatch. "Go, Abigail, live!" He shoved her down into the darkness. "Jericho!" she screamed, her hand reaching up. He slammed the hatch shut. She heard the heavy bolt slide into place from above. Then she heard the front door crash open. "Drop it, Vance!" a voice boomed. "Come and get it!" Jericho's voice was a defiant roar. Gunfire erupted directly above her head, deafening, violent, final. Then a heavy thud, and silence. Abigail clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. She stumbled through the dark, damp tunnel, sobbing. She emerged into the blinding daylight of the ravine behind the house. She had to run. She had to save the baby. But she couldn't. She stopped at the edge of the woods. She looked back at the cabin. Smoke was billowing from the roof. "I am not a victim," she thought. "I am the wife of Jericho Vance." She checked the Colt in her pocket. 6 shots. She didn't run away. She circled back. She climbed the ridge, overlooking the front of the cabin. Through the smoke, she saw the scene. The 3 Pinkertons were dragging a body out onto the snow. Jericho. He was limp blood soaking his duster. They dumped him in the mud. "Is he dead?" one of them asked, kicking Jericho's boot. "Took 2 to the chest," the lead agent said, holstering his gun. "He's done. Now find the girl." "She can't be far." Rage, pure and white-hot, flooded Abigail's veins. They thought he was dead. They were letting their guard down. She braced her arm against a pine tree. She remembered Jericho's voice. "Aim for the center of mass. Don't hesitate." She lined up the sights on the lead agent. Breathe in, breathe out. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand. The lead agent dropped, clutching his leg. "Sniper!" The second agent screamed, diving for cover behind the water trough. Abigail fired again, the bullet kicking up snow inches from his head. She was pinning them down. "Who the hell is shooting?" the wounded agent yelled. "It's the girl!" the third one shouted, spotting her muzzle flash. "She's on the ridge." They turned their guns toward her. Bullets whizzed past her, stripping bark from the tree. She ducked, heart hammering. She was outgunned. She was going to die. But then a miracle happened. Or rather, a nightmare came back to life. Down in the muddy yard, the corpse moved. Jericho Vance, bleeding from 2 chest wounds, but very much alive thanks to the thick leather Bible he kept in his breast pocket, a gift from his dead wife Sarah, sat up. He reached into his boot and pulled out a hidden derringer. The 2 standing agents were focused on Abigail. They never saw it coming. Bang! Bang! 2 shots at point-blank range. The agents crumpled. The wounded leader tried to crawl for his gun, but Jericho was on him. He didn't shoot him. He pistol-whipped him with the empty derringer, knocking him cold. Jericho collapsed back into the mud, groaning. "Jericho!" Abigail screamed, sliding down the snowy embankment. She ran to him, falling to her knees. He was pale, his breathing ragged. He opened one eye. "You didn't run," he wheezed. "You didn't die," she sobbed, ripping his shirt open to check the wounds. The bullets had bruised his ribs and cracked the sternum, but the book had stopped them from piercing his heart. "You're a terrible listener." Jericho smiled, weakly, blood on his teeth. "But a hell of a shot." Abigail kissed his forehead, weeping with relief. "I'm your wife. Remember till death do us part." "Well," Jericho grunted, looking at the burning cabin, "we got the death part out of the way. Now we just need a new house." But the drama wasn't over. As Abigail helped him sit up, the lead agent, the one Jericho had knocked out, groaned. "You can't win," the agent mumbled, blood running down his face. "Senator Graves. He's coming himself. He's on the train. He wants the baby. He'll burn this whole mountain down." Jericho and Abigail exchanged a look. The Pinkertons were just the first wave. The final boss was coming. "Let him come," Jericho said, his voice regaining its steel. He looked at Abigail. "We aren't running anymore. This is our mountain, and if the senator wants a war, we'll give him a war." Jericho looked at the burning cabin, then at the vast, wild landscape around them. "But we need help. We need witnesses. We need the one thing Graves fears more than guns." "What?" Abigail asked. "The truth," Jericho said. "We're going to town, and we're going to get married. For real. In front of God and everyone. Let's see him try to kill a senator's daughter-in-law in the middle of a wedding." Abigail's eyes widened. "Daughter-in-law?" "Yeah," Jericho smirked. "Didn't I tell you my brother Caleb, the one who wrote the ad, he's a journalist for the New York Tribune, and he's coming to the wedding." The descent from the mountain felt less like a journey and more like a funeral procession for a life that no longer existed. Behind them, the cabin, the fortress of solitude Jericho Vance had built to keep the world at bay, was nothing but a smoldering pyre. The black smoke spiraled into the crisp Wyoming sky, a signal fire marking the end of the hangman and the birth of a man with something to lose. They rode in a buckboard wagon, salvaged from a neighbor, the wheels groaning against the muddy ruts of the trail. Jericho held the reins, his knuckles white. He sat stiffly, every jolt of the wagon sending a fresh wave of agony through his taped ribs and the raw, bullet-grazed flesh of his chest. His face was pale beads of cold sweat clinging to his brow. But his hands were steady. Beside him, Abigail sat like a queen in exile. The lace wedding dress, rescued from the flames, was no longer pristine. Mud hemmed the skirt, and the scent of wood smoke clung to the delicate satin, but she wore it with a dignity that defied the grime. "You don't have to do this," Jericho murmured, his voice rough with pain. He scanned the tree line, eyes narrow. "We can keep riding. Mexico isn't so far." Abigail reached out, covering his scarred hand with her own. "I am done running, Jericho. I ran from St. Louis. I ran to your mountain. If we run now, we run forever. Today we stand. Standing might get us killed." He countered, though a grim pride tugged at his mouth. "Then we die as husband and wife," she said simply. and we die telling the truth. They reached Bitter Creek at high noon. The town usually bustling with the noise of the livery, and the saloon was eerily quiet. The wind whistled through the gaps in the clapboard buildings, kicking up devils of dust in the street. But the town wasn't empty. It was waiting. Word had spread with the speed of a prairie fire. The hangman was coming down, the senator was coming in, and a wedding was scheduled for the stroke of 12. As the wagon rolled down the main thoroughfare, faces appeared in windows. Men stepped out of the saloon, wiping foam from their moustaches, hands drifting instinctively to their belts. They looked at Jericho, bloodied, battered, yet unbroken, and saw not a monster, but a man making a last stand. Jericho pulled the horses up in front of the small whitewashed church. Reverend Silas was waiting on the steps, clutching his Bible as if it were a shield, shaking so badly his spectacles were sliding down his nose. "Mr. Vance," Silas stammered as Jericho helped Abigail down. "Perhaps we should wait. The atmosphere is not conducive to a sacrament." "God don't care about the atmosphere, Silas," Jericho said, taking Abigail's arm. "Start the service." They climbed the steps, the wood creaking under their feet. A crowd gathered at the foot of the stairs in a silent semicircle. Elias Thorne, the station master, stood at the front, a double-barreled shotgun resting casually over his shoulder. The blacksmith Lars stood nearby with a heavy sledgehammer. They weren't interfering, but they were watching. "Dearly beloved," Silas began, his voice squeaking, "we are gathered here today." The thunder of hooves cut him off. The ground vibrated as a heavy black carriage, drawn by 4 midnight-colored horses, tore around the corner. It was flanked by 4 outriders and in long dusters with Winchesters. The carriage skidded to a halt, blocking the sun and casting a long, cold shadow over the wedding party. The door swung open, and Senator Colton Graves stepped out. He was immaculate in a tailored silk suit, looking like a viper in a sandbox. He adjusted his cuffs, smiling a smile that didn't reach his dead, shark-like eyes. "A charming tableau," Graves announced, his voice smooth. "Truly rustic. But I'm afraid I must object to the union." The crowd murmured. Jericho stepped in front of Abigail, his hand hovering over his gun, a barrier of flesh and iron between the wolf and the lamb. "On what grounds?" Jericho challenged. "On the grounds of insanity," Graves said, walking closer. His gunmen fanned out behind him. "Miss Moore is a troubled woman. She has stolen property. She is unwell. I am here to return her to the care of her family." "I have no family," Abigail called out, stepping from behind Jericho. "And the only property I carry is my own child, your grandchild, Colton." The whisper ran through the crowd like a shockwave. Grandchild Graves's smile vanished. "You are delusional. There is no child, just a sickness we will cure." He snapped his fingers. "Boys, secure her. If the animal beside her twitches, put him down." The 4 gunmen stepped forward, rifles cocking with a metallic click-clack. Jericho didn't flinch. He knew the odds were impossible, but he wouldn't yield. "You pull those triggers," Jericho said, "and you start a bloodbath. Is that how you want to start your governorship?" "Who's going to tell?" Graves sneered, gesturing to the dusty town. "I own the judges. I own the marshals. I'll write the history of what happened here. Tragic shootout involving a fugitive. It will be a footnote. I wouldn't be so sure about that." A voice rang out from the church vestibule. The heavy oak doors swung open. A man stepped out, slender, wearing a city suit and wire-rimmed glasses. In his hands he held a large camera on a tripod. "Who the hell are you?" Graves barked. "Caleb Vance." The man grinned. "Jericho's brother, and senior correspondent for the New York Tribune." He squeezed the bulb. Boom! A cloud of magnesium flash powder exploded blindingly white, freezing the scene, the senator snarling his thugs with rifles raised against an unarmed bride and groom. "I call this one democracy at gunpoint," Caleb shouted. He rapidly switched the plate. "I've already wired the first half of the story to Manhattan Senator. The Senator's Secret Attempted Murder in Wyoming. They're holding the front page for the ending. Does the ending involve you massacring a wedding party? Graves froze. He stared at the camera as if it were a cannon. He knew the power of the Tribune. A picture like this with witnesses wouldn't just lose him the election. It would put him in prison. He looked at the crowd. The townsfolk were no longer passive. Elias Thorne racked his shotgun. Lars hefted his hammer. The illusion of Graves's power had shattered. Here on the edge of the world, his money couldn't buy silence. "You're bluffing," Graves hissed, sweat breaking on his lip. "Test me," Jericho said, stepping forward. "You want a war, Colton. You got one. But your name will be mud before the sun sets." The standoff stretched for an agonizing 10 seconds. Finally, Graves swore softly. He glared at Abigail with pure hatred. "Enjoy your poverty, Abigail. You're nothing. Better dirt than your blood money," she replied. "Let's go." Graves spat at his men. He marched back to the carriage with the stiffness of a defeated general. As the carriage thundered out of town, a cheer erupted from the street, shaking the church bells. Jericho let out a breath he had held for 5 years. His knees buckled slightly, but Abigail caught him. "You okay?" she whispered. "I am now," he breathed. The weight of the hangman was gone. He turned to the trembling reverend. "Silas, finish it." Yes. "Do you, Jericho, take this woman?" "I do." Jericho said the words, heavy, with an oath more binding than any he had sworn as a marshal. "And do you, Abigail?" "I do." "Then I pronounce you man and wife." Jericho pulled Abigail close, mindful of his ribs, but ignoring the pain, and kissed her. It tasted of dust fear relief, and a promise, the wildest flower. They didn't rebuild the cabin on the ridge. The memories there were too cold. Instead, they claimed a plot of land in the valley where the soil was rich. Jericho hung up his guns mostly, and used his hands to build a home with windows that let in the light. 6 months later, when the aspen trees turned gold, Abigail gave birth to a son. They named him Caleb, after the uncle who saved them with a box of glass and powder. The boy had Jericho's dark, watchful eyes and Abigail's stubborn chin. The town of Bitter Creek changed too. They no longer crossed the street to avoid Jericho Vance. They tipped their hats, they brought pies. They accepted him not as a monster, but as a man who had walked through fire for his family. Some nights when the winter wind howled, Jericho would sit by the fire, watching Abigail rock their son. He would think about the letter, the lie, and the blizzard that brought her to his door. They say the West was won by guns, but Jericho knew the truth. It was won by the desperate hope of a woman in a wedding dress who refused to take no for an answer. "What are you thinking about?" Abigail asked one evening. Jericho smiled, the scar on his cheek crinkling. "Just thinking. For a mail-order bride, you turned out to be the most expensive thing I ever acquired." "Expensive?" She raised an eyebrow. "Cost me a cabin, 3 ribs, and my reputation as the meanest bastard in Wyoming." He chuckled, leaning over to kiss her forehead. "Best deal I ever made." And that folks is the legend of Jericho and Abigail Vance. They proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in the Wild West isn't drawing a gun. It's opening your heart. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It helps us bring more untold legends to life. And if you want to hear more gritty, romantic, and twist-filled tales from the frontier, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. What do you think? Did Abigail make the right choice, trusting the hangman? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next trail.